Today's webinar brought to you by OraSure Technologies. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster cost savings with minimal risk of tampering, and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The oral fluid drug test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for 9 drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, methamphetamines, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, methadone, and opiates. As the #1 recognized brand name in oral fluid testing in a 2015 National Drug Testing Industry Survey. With fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, the clinical setting screening programs, among others. The presentation is entitled The Dangers of Legal Marijuana and How to Address It in Your Workplace, and will be presented by Joe McGuire. While in the field of drug and alcohol testing, Joe was appointed to serve in the Colorado Governor's Task Force to recommend a legislative framework for marijuana regulations. On the taxation, banking, and civil law work group, she recommendations for employers' right to drug test. Joe serves on the Drug and Alcohol Testing Industry Association Board of Directors, chairing the International Marijuana Education and Outreach Committee, working with national health experts to provide educational information regarding public and safety. The current project, 5 Minutes of Courage, is committed to sharing the Colorado experience with legal marijuana as well as resources, scientific evidence-based research, and training that will aid and assist in countering the societal harmful effects of addictive substance as revenue options. It will be a pleasure to hear from Joe.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. I'm speaking to you this morning from Juneau, Alaska, where it's snowing just a little bit and working with a great team up here in the drug collection arena. I'm very excited to talk to you about this topic today. Some of the things that we're going to talk about, we're going to discuss some outcomes of marijuana legalization as seen in Colorado and back to workplace, understanding CBD versus THC and whole medical marijuana discussion. We're going to talk about what today's marijuana looks like. It's turned into quite a different product than most of us are familiar with. And most importantly, I think employers' rights and responsibilities, because we really do want to keep a focus on workplace overall here. So I just want to jump right in because I've got a lot of material and I want to make sure that I get to your questions, and don't hesitate to type questions into the chat box so that we can make sure that we address those. I'm just going to leap right in with some outcomes that we've seen in Colorado pertaining to legal marijuana, and just dive into what we are seeing on our roadways. First of all, here's some statistics that have been compiled by Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area in an amazing report that was released just about 6 weeks ago. And if you'd like to get your own copies of these charts and graphs that I have, please don't hesitate to contact me and I will send you the report, or you can find it on the Rocky Mountain HIDA website. But if you take a look at marijuana-related traffic deaths, as we started tracking these specifically from 2006, we saw that we had a 6.9% of marijuana-related fatalities in 2006. In 2009 is when Colorado changed their laws pertaining to medical marijuana and went with a broader, what we call a commercialization approach. We really opened it up. We jumped to 10% in 2009, and then you can see we've progressively gone up, had a very, very minor dip in 2013, but in 2014 reached an all-time high with a staggering 19% of our traffic-related deaths being having marijuana involved. So that's 94 deaths for the year 2014. And I want to explain about this a little bit is you often hear how we're raking in the millions and millions of dollars. So isn't it worth it because we're raking in the millions of dollars in Colorado? So a lot of times people will come up to me and they will say, yeah, well, you're not complaining so much about the money. Well, just week before last, just in the election that we had to vote on how we would spend the $40 million of tax revenue that has come in for marijuana since legalization began. So for 2013, 2014, we had to vote on how to spend that money. And the voters said, well, we want to do with it what was promised to us during the initial election in 2012, and that was to build schools and school buildings. So $40 million so far is the revenue we've gotten. Now consider the fact that the U.S. Department of Transportation National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says that the economic and societal impact of motor vehicle crashes in 2010 tells that the economic cost of one vehicle fatality is $1,398,916. So that's property damage, that's all of the results, the tests that have to be run, the exams, and all of the state labor and productivity that goes into that, the medical personnel, and all of the costs with courts and everything cost a state $1.3 million, almost $1.4 million to adjudicate a traffic fatality. Now, if you go back and say 2014, Colorado had 94 of those, that total comes out to $131,498,104. So just in traffic fatalities alone in 2014, we were out almost $131.5 million for traffic fatalities. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Looking at what we're seeing for our testing in the state, marijuana is used single and by itself about 33% of the time. A larger majority of the time, 37% of the time, it is combined with alcohol. And then you'll see marijuana and other drugs, no alcohol involved 15% of the time, and then marijuana, other drugs, and alcohol 15% of the time. So here you have a pretty balanced beach how folks are using and combining their drugs and alcohol out on the roads. And so this is operators vehicles. So this comes from the state lab. And we've had a few different things going on in our state. We've used testing when we're talking about roadside right now. That's where we're at. We just did a trial basis of oral fluid testing in Colorado because we're really trying to look for those better methods of how to gauge the issue and how to get quicker outcomes and, of course, less cost than blood testing. But we have used a few different labs, and so sometimes our stats are a little wonky. So, for instance, in this slide, you can see, and these notes are hard to read because they're very small, and this was just a picture capture, but we ran 4,371 cannabinoid screens in 2014. 65% of those were positive. Now, along in here in 2014, we changed our testing to 2 nanograms or higher, where prior than that we were doing 1 nanogram or higher. And so it changed our numbers a little bit in our positives. So if the numbers, if we had stuck to 1 nanogram throughout all the testing history, we might see these numbers a little higher in 2014, but we upped the grams, if that makes sense. So these blood draws, and so you can see those outcomes there, and then let me here and show you what this actually looks like. So this is what's happening in the last couple of years with numbers of DUIDs in Colorado by the Colorado State Patrol. 77% of total DUIs DUIDs, driving under the influence of drugs, involve marijuana. 41% involve marijuana only. So if you look at 174 as that a total number of DUIDs involving marijuana for 2014. Let's go ahead and look at costs really quick again. We said Colorado Department of Transportation says the cost of one DUI offense is approximately $10,000, and estimate that a DUID would be approximately the same. So you get this number 874, and you multiply it with this cost of $10,270, and that's $8,975,980 in DUIs. So if you add together our $131 million plus our $8 million for DUIs, we're already out $140 million in just traffic alone in our state. So I don't want to focus on numbers, but I do think they're quite interesting because it kind of takes away that argument that, oh, you guys are just rolling in the money. Something I find really troubling is that adult marijuana use is now almost double the national average in Colorado. So we are seeing a greater percentage of adults using. And a lot of people said, well, your adult use won't really go up. It'll be new customers. And customers are in the 12 to 24 range group. Well, that's good news because we are seeing an increase in youth use. But since we're focusing on workplace today, I'm keeping this to the adult numbers. But the youth studies are quite alarming, so if you are working with youth or have that concern, it would be very interesting to look at the HIDE report, as I mentioned. But adult use going up is very alarming. We are seeing 13.6% of Colorado adults using marijuana, which is almost double the national rate of 7%. But look at that little second piece there. That is home to the most number of marijuana outlets in state. Denver kind of went in whole, as we say, with allowing retail sales and full commercialization. A lot of our localities, most of the localities in Colorado actually declined to participate in retail sales. Personal marijuana use, personal marijuana grows are still fully legal all throughout the state. A lot of the local municipalities said we don't want to open up to that whole thing. So in Denver, where it's very broadly commercialized and sold retail, they lead the state with 18.5% of adults as current users. So if you think about that fact, we need to take a look at what are those outcomes in the workplace and to employers, the considerations that they have to, think about. We're enforcing our workplace policies. So keep that number in the back of your head because normally we do say it's about 10% of your workplace that will be involved in some type of illicit drug use. Colorado, where retail is being focused on, is now getting closer to 20%. It's an alarming figure if marijuana legalization is coming to your state to be voted on, or you have already passed those laws and haven't quite rolled out. I know that, for instance, in Illinois, they began allowing medical dispensaries that opened up as of Monday, yesterday. So they will see changes in what happens in the workplace because of that. Some of you will be voting on that coming up in 2016. So just keep these numbers in the back of your mind. One of the things that I want to point out is the increase in drug treatment admissions at all age groups for Colorado. So this stat comes from the Colorado Department of Human Services and Office of Behavioral Health. And you can see that alcohol is still our number one admission for treatment providers, but number two is marijuana. Now, we have seen a spike in methamphetamine, and methamphetamine is kind of climbing up there. You look at this chart and go, okay, well, your marijuana admissions really in 2013 and 2014 are kind of dropping, so is this very alarming? The reality of what's going on here, and we're hearing this all throughout the state, is it's companies are saying, well, marijuana is legal now, so we're not going to cover that as a treatment option. And a lot of families, and I mean, I'm dealing with families on a weekly basis who are calling myself and my colleagues and saying, we need to find a treatment place for our kids or for someone in our family, young adults, college-age kids. They're having trouble getting admitted into treatment for their marijuana addiction, and the families are having to pay cash up front, which is, of course, very difficult, very costly to do. Some kids cannot even get admitted. I was in a support group with some adults several months back, and one of them said on the screen when you come in, they were actually advising each other as addicts to take opiates before you go to your talk screen so that you can get into treatment. Otherwise, if marijuana is the only thing in your system, you'll get denied. Really a sad situation on what's happening with people who need help for marijuana addiction. But these numbers are no laughing matter. I mean, you look at 6 per year that are getting treatment, and this is really troubling, and it's going to be climbing. And then I think one of the most sobering things that we have to take a look at is marijuana-related deaths in Colorado. These are just a few stories that I'm putting out here. There are so many more. We have pages and pages of these stories, and I'm sad to say that they'll continue cropping up. But the top right is a young man, Levi Pungi, was an exchange student in attending Wyoming University in Colorado for spring break with his friends. He was 19 years old. They obtained marijuana edibles, and they purchased a marijuana cookie, brought it back to the hotel room, and apparently they were supposed to only eat 1/6 of that cookie, would have been one serving, or we typically say 100, there's 10 grams per serving, and we were supposed to be limiting servings can be in an edible, but it's just a recommendation and it's not enforced. So a lot of these products have far more than one serving, and of course, a lot of times the serving just has to be demarcated. So maybe a chocolate bar would need to be broken into sections by servings, but it doesn't mean a young person or anybody really would eat a whole candy bar. So anyway, Levi ate a cookie. So after eating that cookie, he had a very severe psychotic break in his death. And then the same with the young man below him, Luke Goodman. He ate some candies, I believe some peach gummy candies, while on a ski trip to Colorado with his family. Had a similar reaction that resulted in his death. To the right, you see Christina Kirk. She's a casualty of a husband who ate some marijuana candies and a psychotic break and took the gun out of the family safe and killed her while she was on the phone with 911 asking for help. The children across the top are Cadence Boyer, the first little girl, is a marijuana-related traffic fatality. She was in her Halloween costume just a year ago trick-or-treating with her family. And a marijuana-impaired driver went up on the curb and killed her instantly. Accident. And she actually lives in Washington. Not every one of these people lived in Colorado. The 3 little boys across the top, one is a hash oil fire. The other 2 were death exposure with the parents were using marijuana, and these are marijuana-related deaths. The mother and her baby were a marijuana traffic fatality in the state of Colorado. On the top right is Andy. He's a case death by suicide. He took his own life after despairing over his marijuana use, not feeling that he could ever recover from that. His mother, Sally, is a wonderful advocate out of Arizona who tells Andy's story and his addiction with marijuana. And then the young man in the middle, the bottom center, I took this photo after being at a presentation 2 weeks ago by Ed Shamalia in Kentucky. He's a law enforcement officer who's nephew. This is a nephew, or maybe it's a cousin. I believe it's a cousin. This young man, his friends obtained some Colorado marijuana edibles and oils and some dabbing products this past summer. And this young man ate some edibles, and of course he did not feel any differently. Edibles take a while to go through the system. They take a while to metabolize. People don't automatically feel the high, and so very often they'll say, well, nothing happened, I need to eat some more. And so they continue to eat. Well, he already had those ingested the products, and then he went further and took a hit off of a dab product, and I'm going to show you some photographs of dabs in just a few minutes and what those are. But his friends say that instantly his eyes rolled back up in his head, he became unconscious and stopped breathing. So called 911. He ended up on life support in this state, being on a breathing machine, respirated for 4 days. And it's a very, very sad story. But if had not gotten 911 there in time, if he had not been able to get life support in time, his life would have been lost. We're seeing many of these cases, especially with children out of Colorado. And even though you will hear no deaths related to marijuana overdose, and that's something that the marijuana industry likes to kind of bang that drum in a lot of their campaigning and their talking points, I honestly believe, sadly, and I really hate to say it, but I believe we actually will see that happen, and it will be the first time because of these higher potency products. So let's take a look at, go back to our focus on workplace now that you know some of the actual outcomes and the realities of what this looks like. Let's take a look at what's happening in the workplace. Colorado and Washington. Quest Diagnostics Drug Test Index shows that we've seen similar numbers for 2013 and for 2014 that positive marijuana tests in the workplace have jumped from the national average of 6% to 20% in Colorado, and then as high as 23% in the state of Washington. And these numbers right here were the first after legalization, and we need to continue to watch these numbers and see what happens, and then we'll be adding, I'm sure, Oregon and Alaska to these numbers as their programs unfold and we see what's going to happen there. But it can be kind of difficult to come by these types of numbers through all the various labs. These are Quest only. I mean, there are so many other labs that we have out there that are starting to track this data and bring these numbers in. So I'm looking forward in the future to seeing what we get from all of the labs and from your companies. If you're in drug testing, keep track of these things because they're very important to us to show the impact of what's going on and to talk to employers about the need for their awareness. So we take a look at the numbers, and then we see that 73% of all current drug users ages 18 and older are employed. There can be 6.7 million full-time workers and 1.6 million part-time workers, and that's, again, another number by Quest Diagnostics. So when you, well, what does that really mean in the whole scheme of things? That typically equates to, as I said earlier, nationally, we boil that down to about 9% of full-time. And so that, if that gives you an idea of what you're looking at, how many people do you have in your employ? And take about 10% of that, and statistically about 10% have a drug issue. And so it's very important that you know what your policy says, that you have a policy, have a policy in place, you know what it says, and that you follow it consistently. So we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But according to the U.S. Department of Labor, drug abuse in the workplace costs employers $81 billion each year in lost productivity. And I continue to say that this is something that has a huge impact on the small business owner because they're the least likely to keep track of these types of things. So what does lost productivity mean? If you're in any size business or if you're an employee who has coworkers and you're wondering, how does this affect me? Well, think about the fact that these are folks who show up late to work, who miss days, and so that's a burden on other employees, and work doesn't get done. Deadlines don't get met. Quotas don't get met. You lose money because you can't serve your customer properly. You have just loss of work time, people who are unable to be productive in the workplace in and of itself. You have accidents and injuries that take people out and place a burden on your other workers. Plus, you have medical costs in there for every injury. And we have some companies that have talked about these are the approximate losses per worker from accidents and injuries. And, one of the things that we're looking forward to in Colorado is getting some up-to-date information on workers' comp claims that are directly related to marijuana. I'll tell you, we're having a struggle with that because our data in the state is about 5 years behind in showing us those reports and making them public. So if you think about that, it will still be 3 more years before, if the current pace continues, it'd be 3 more years before we really understand how many marijuana-related accidents we're having in the workplace in Colorado just based on work comp reports. So that's something that, we'll have to keep an eye on, and we're trying to get better data. So speaking of accidents and injuries, marijuana use in and of itself causes 55% more industrial accidents, 85% more injuries, and 75% more absenteeism. And these are the ways that those costs add up. If you are not doing post-accident drug tests in the workplace, this is a huge mistake. I really want to encourage employers to be vigilant about post-accident drug testing. It's incredibly important that you keep track and know what is impacting the safety of your employees. I've seen many companies who opt out of that, and I really do not understand it because you need to know what are the cause of those accidents. And then for those of you that are in the drug testing industry, this is something that I just continue to find mind-boggling. Bill Kerr does a regular survey on those in the industry, and he asks them, what impact will legalized marijuana have on drug testing and the drug testing industry? And 26.7% feel that it'll have little to no or no negative impact on the industry. 21% say no impact yet, but I believe there will be. 67% say employers are confused and worried about how to deal with marijuana in the workplace. 67.6%. That's a huge number, and that is why we continue to focus on this topic, why we're doing this webinar today, to try to clarify and alleviate that confusion. Some employers have already eliminated marijuana from their drug tests, 16.9%. I have a lot to say about that, and so I'll get to that in just a minute. And legal marijuana could potentially harm the drug testing industry significantly. Well, 19% of people in the drug testing industry feel like it will have a significant impact. And so I think this demands a lot of ongoing education about the fact that marijuana is an impairing substance. This last summer, USA Today did a poll of employers and found that a whopping 19% of employers said I would allow employees to use marijuana with a doctor's prescription. You can see that right here in the little graphic, the infographic that they put up. And this is a shocking for a reason that you may not think. So are thinking, oh, Joe's probably freaked out about 19% there. And actually, that is an alarming number. But what I want you to pay attention to is the fact they use the word prescription. This shows you what kind of confusion employers are having when it comes to marijuana. Because first and foremost, using marijuana for a medical recommendation is not a prescription. Marijuana cannot be prescribed by a physician. It is a Schedule I controlled substance for a reason, and that reason it falls into these categories here. Federal government, there are no dosing standards. Marijuana doesn't have any, you take this much for this much pain, this many times a day. That is not how it works with this substance at all. So, I was at a conference a few weeks ago, and I heard someone say, very, very eloquently say, what other medicine is there where the doctor says, go get a pound and use as much as you want whenever you want for whatever you want and see how that works. That's kind of how it works with marijuana, and so that is not how medicine works. So the term medical marijuana is actually a misnomer. It's kind of something that really fools people into thinking that they're using a medicine, and it has not actually ever been qualified or standardized as a medication in the United States or anywhere else. It has high potential for dependency, lack of medically accepted use, and no safety standards. For instance, someone who has a medical recommendation and they show you, well, I've got this card, and so my doctor says I can use it. There are no indicators for other drugs, for combining, with maybe their blood pressure medication or whatever else they may be using. There's no safety standards of any kind, no warning labels, anything like that. So marijuana is not a prescribed medication. There is no prescription. So when you look at this little survey here, this is very misleading and causing a huge misunderstanding. Really, this should have been retracted and said, we interpreted this incorrectly. It's a recommendation, a loose-based recommendation, because most physicians will not even recommend it because they don't find medical value in it. In fact, here's a statement posted on drugabuse.gov. It says the term medical marijuana is generally used to refer to the whole unprocessed marijuana plant or its crude extracts, which are not recognized or approved as medicine by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Marijuana is still considered a contaminant in foods and not an ingredient. And then below, I want you to, so let's clarify, well, why do we bring a lot of information about people who are being helped by marijuana and these kids who have seizures, especially the Dravet syndrome, and a lot of states are changing what they're allowing medical marijuana for that very reason. So now I'm sorry for all the words, but I think these paragraphs are very, very helpful in clarifying this issue. Scientific study of the active chemicals in marijuana called cannabinoids. Marijuana has a lot of different properties. So hydrocannabinol is one, and then there's the cannabinoids over here that another. There are many of them. But the discovery of cannabinoids has led to the development of 2 FDA-approved medications and is leading to the development of new pharmaceuticals that have the therapeutic benefits while minimizing or eliminating the harmful side effects, including high produced by eating or smoking marijuana leaves. So raw marijuana, sometimes we call it grass or plant, a lot of different things, the weed part, that is not medicine and has no medical efficacy at all. That's about THC, that's about getting high. But there's this other property called CBD, and let's look at what that actually looks like. It would be a pharmaceutical grade medication that is properly labeled and has warnings on it. So for crystal clarity, THC, not a sin, that's why. CBD has medical value, and also CBD and THC do not exist in the marijuana plant in equal proportions outside of about 2 to 3%. Okay, so if you get THC that is any higher than 2 to 3%, the CBD goes down. If it's CBD that is higher than 2 to 3%, the THC goes down. So the high CBD products are valuable, but people go, well, we're growing pot with a lot of CBD in it. Well, actually, that's not entirely possible. It does happen, but so CBD cannot be not THC nor CBD. Once you get over like 12 to 15%, it starts breaking down out of the plant. It just completely starts breaking down, and you have to synthesize it. So then you have these extracts that are being created and the oils that are being pulled out. Raw leaf marijuana does not produce these high-octane extracts. It has to start being synthesized. So what we're seeing in Colorado, I think other states are going to begin to see this that are legalizing higher THC than we've ever seen before. And a lot of people are selling products that claim to have high amounts of CBD, but in a recent test by the FDA, like 60% of the products that were tested, in fact, I think it was 68% of the products tested were found to have no CBD in them. People are packaging this stuff up and selling it because it's kind of a hot item right now. But unless you are getting this from a place like GW Pharmaceuticals, something that is legitimate, I want to go back to this nasal spray, an oil that comes from a pharmaceutical company, you are typically not getting a product with CBD in it. So products that we're seeing, that we're putting them now into vape pens or cigarettes. Some people know that, of course, the edibles. And then this bottom right picture is something called dabs or wax, shatter. It's called a lot of different things. But this is actually extracted with butane hash oil. And the metal rod that you see there, that is a nail. So that's like a little 16-penny nail with a bit of dabs on it, and it's a tiny, tiny amount that people use. And one hit of that, when it is used, the Colorado Department of Public Health says is the equivalent to about 26 off of a marijuana cigarette, extremely potent and powerful. For employers to think about what challenges they're facing, these vape pen products, we know of the cartridges that go right in the vape pens, extremely potent. Some of these are boasting 70, 80, and 90% THC. And folks can these and, stand out on the sidewalk. They don't have the smell that marijuana typically has, so it can be disguised. And the edible products, extreme high potencies. These are 30, 40, 50%. Some say 60% THC. There are many, many different products, just about anything you could think of. But these are some that I thought employees could easily disguise in a lunchbox, and an employer would have a very hard time telling what exactly they're using. Spray. And so you see some granola bars, some small chocolate bars, some mints, snack cakes, and sodas. And these products all contain more than one serving. So especially when you have a soda, you can have 6 to 8 servings. Some sodas have 10 servings in them, and you can't really know how much you're getting. Another thing that I'm seeing in Colorado, this is a dispensary in a retail store for marijuana that used to be a McDonald's. If you can see, there's the store on the left and the place on the right. It's now at a major intersection on southeast Denver. And behind that place is the main parking area when you go in there. And I visited this place noon on a Thursday. Symphony trucks with the company logos were parked on the other side of the little former Play Place, now Marijuana Grow area, and 8 company logo shirts were standing in line inside of the retail store. So I think employers, this is something that when you're writing your policy, you may want to consider, or amending your policy, you may want to consider if you want your company truck parked in the parking of the dispensary and your employees visiting the retail store to purchase marijuana during the work day, because your advertising is going on in there during work hours. So what does it mean for employers? Who can be under the influence at work? What does marijuana do? How does it behave? Well, in addition to what we already talked about with greater accidents and injuries, it causes slow response time, memory retention problems, lack of ability to multitask, lack of motivation, inability to problem solve and reason, decreased ability to handle stressors, time distance tracking problems, and we're seeing neuropsychological decline and marijuana-induced psychotic symptoms with the greater potency products. It really is, I heard a lot of people say, so what, people will just be relaxed. That is not actually how it works with the new that we're seeing. It's something that is more akin to be amped up in these huge psychotic breaks. And it just depends on the products that are being used, whether it's an indica or a sativa. There's one calms you down, one hypes you up. So a lot of us don't even realize that marijuana has a property that can amp people up and be more like a sort of a cocaine effect. But that can also be marijuana. And so that surprises people sometimes. But it is still a drug. It is still an illicit drug. It is still a federally illegal drug. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that it is impairing. And you will hear people say, well, I use all the time. I have a lot built up on my system, therefore I'm not impaired. That is not the case. Maybe 1 nanogram of marijuana in the brain, it means brain saturation and impairment. People don't feel like they are impaired. They don't recognize that they are impaired. They don't behave as though they are impaired, but studies show us from Europe over and over again that on multitasking abilities, they do show impairment, even if they maintain a baseline level in their system of THC all the time. So don't be fooled by that argument that I use all the time so I'm not impaired, because it's absolutely not the case. The person doesn't understand the level of impairment that they function with all the time. And for the workplace, I want to talk a moment about employers who are considering removing THC from the drug panel. I'm going to start off by saying this is a huge mistake. You would not refuse to do a breath alcohol test on someone who came to work with apparent intoxication from alcohol. Why in the world would you remove marijuana from a drug test panel when it is an impairing substance and the higher potencies are causing more acute impairment time? People will say, well, it's unfair because it lasts in the body's fat cells for weeks, and so they could have used weeks and weeks ago. The reality of it is that testing picks up regular use. If someone just happened one time to take off, you test them 2 weeks later, that is not going to show up on a drug screen. That's not how this works. But I will say that in all of the testing types and methods, this particular argument, oral fluid testing, is fantastic because it has the shorter detection time right after use. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But I want to get to the fact that every employer needs to understand their rights. We still have the Safe and Free Workplace Act put into place by the federal government. You have a right to know your state laws, to assert safe and free workplace, to what your workers' comp laws say, your unemployment laws say, provisions in states where marijuana is legal. Look up what the employer clause is for you. Also, there are some fantastic resources out there. I know Dacia has them on their website, and several other places have them posted for looking up current laws in your state and employment laws specifically, and how to find out what's going on and what you are and are not allowed to do. Right now, it is the employer's right to safe and drug-free workplace, but you do need to have some things in place. First and foremost is a sound drug policy. I always say never, ever try to pull someone out for a drug screen if you do not have a drug policy in place. You're on very thin ice, and you will end up coming out the wrong end of a lawsuit if you're trying to drug test someone without having a policy in place. So get your drug policy in place, and I know Current Consulting Group can help you with that, and they do a wonderful job. That policy should have zero tolerance for being under the influence at work. None should be allowed to come to work impaired or under the influence, we should say. Just not okay. It's not safe. Communicate your policy and expectations with all of your staff and your employees. And by the way, that's not just a one-time event. Do that on a regular basis. Make sure you have proof that everyone has heard that and understands and knows what policies are. Routinely and consistently enforce your policies and do so with clarity. I hear a lot of people that say, well, we're just going to take the marijuana stuff on a case-by-case basis. I believe that is a very bad decision, because if you treat one employee one way and handle the next employee on the next case in a different manner because you're more sympathetic to them or they have a different story, less sympathetic to them, and you're not being consistent in handling these cases the same way, you have a problem. Now, where you can make different choices are if someone chooses to get help or choose not to get help. If you have a continued drug user versus someone who wants to go to treatment and wants to be on a treatment plan and continue up with follow-up testing, let's try to keep people in their positions at work so you don't have to continue to hire new people. That's fantastic, and we see a lot of success with people who can be rehabilitated and maintain their employment. But however you handle it up front needs to be very consistent and in line with your workplace policies. And if you find your policy that you're struggling with it, then amend it, alter it, make it a living document, and make it more user-friendly for what you can do. And then with anything, always document what's going on with your employees, because when you come down to needing a reasonable cause test, you need to have that documentation in place to back you up. I mentioned Safe and Drug-Free Workplace Act. You should download this off the DOT website. You should print it out. You should read it. You should be familiar with it. And you should also know that ODAPSI and SAMHSA and all of these great resources that we have at our fingertips right on the Internet, they recognize the fact that every employee has a family, and children who live in addicted homes have greater rates of becoming addicts themselves. So when you help your employees, you are helping the children in their lives to understand that drug use is not a way of life, that should not be an expectation and should not be the quality that we're placing on them. So that's something that you can do to get back to your community. I believe that it is every employer's responsibility not only to protect your employees who don't use drugs. Okay, they have a right to safe and drug-free workplace. They have a right to not be constantly burdened by the person who is under the influence at work, but to protect your customers, to protect your entire work environment, and public. Public health and safety is a responsibility for every one of us. So I just want to tell you one story out of Colorado recently, and that is that a member of the public called a nonprofit that had a truck, a delivery truck and a pickup truck. And they said, hey, we want you to know that your driver is currently driving down the road, smoking a marijuana pipe and tapping it out on the side of the truck on the public roadway. And we just thought you would not want that to happen. And so this is a nationally recognized nonprofit. You would all know the name of it, and they have many locations in Colorado. And so in this instance, the executive director that received the call called her drug testing company, and they reviewed their drug policy and decided drug testing was the appropriate thing to do. So in drug testing of the drivers. Now, the board of directors for this nonprofit was unfamiliar with Colorado law. They didn't understand that it was the employer's right to drug test and to enforce their policy. And so she began drug testing, executive director, drug testing the employees. And long story short, over the course of a lot of drama around these drug tests, the employees were attempting to cheat their tests. They had a lot of positives, then they tried to cheat the test, and the MRO recommended some protocols and processes, observed tests, and things like this. The employees actually banded together and went to the board and said, we feel like we're being discriminated against and harassed, and the board made the decision to ask for the resignation of the executive director. This was an incredibly wrong decision that they made because they had the power position here, and she was doing everything right to protect, remember, the phone call, public health and safety. That was greatest concern and what she was trying to do correctly. So what they actually did was they traded this person who cared about public health and safety for employee base of people who are regularly using drugs, and now they're trying to figure out how they just cope on a day-to-day basis with that choice. And there's going to, I believe, going to be some legal ramifications come from that in the future. It's really too bad, but it was a very wrong decision. And I guess what I want to leave us with is legalization continues to be put on ballot measures on the country. I know that many of the western states will be dealing with this in 2016. California, Utah, Arizona are all going to be dealing with these measures. Bill Current had an amazing quote when we spoke about doing this webinar a few weeks ago. He said, if we remain apathetic to marijuana legalization, then we are party to it. As I look at my state, and I look at what's happening in Colorado, and I look at those faces of people who have lost their lives, and I look at 94 deaths on road fatalities from marijuana, I think that one of us need to take a step back and love our communities more than this. More than the potential for gaining a buck, we need to think about the fact that no amount of tax revenue is worth greater traffic fatalities. No amount of tax revenue is worth greater workplace accidents and injuries. No amount of tax revenue is worth lost lives of young people who consume edibles. We need to think about what we're doing. And when it comes to the workplace and our responsibility to public health and safety in our communities, our children, our families, and the families of those we employ, we have a greater responsibility to do the right thing. So we can enforce that through our policies, but also getting involved in our community and saying, wait a minute, we need to take a look at what we're pursuing here with marijuana, why we are doing it, what we actually know about it, not buying into some simple sound bites of campaign slogans that sound good but are not accurate, and just be more responsible. So that is what I have for outcomes. I want to take a minute and talk about oral fluid testing and marijuana. Remind that oral fluid testing is an advantage for employers. Flexible tests. Think about the fact you don't have to have a restroom that's prepared to do oral fluid testing. We have lab-based testing in 48 states, so you can send them to the lab for confirmation. They are legally defensible and accurate. The great thing here, well, there's many great things, but one of the best things, I think, is that we have a more accurate standard for measuring recent use, detecting recent use, because that's the big thing that the marijuana industry comes after all the time is, well, it's been in the system for so long, so it's not fair. All drug testing is presence and system testing, but okay, with oral fluid testing, you can detect recent use. And we really like the fact that you can take away that cheating factor that you see so often with your analysis. You don't have to worry about having the same gender in case of an observed test. It's not embarrassing for the donor. We have different definitions, I think, in different arenas about what invasive is, but you have that shy bladder syndrome. A lot of people consider there, like a yuck factor with your analysis. Some people don't want to deal with that, but there are many advantages to having those on board. And then you look at the windows of detection. So blood, marijuana comes in and out of the blood very, very quickly. It's not water-based. It's a fat soluble, and so it comes in and goes out of the blood very quickly. You can only catch it in a very short window, and usually that's like within an hour. And then you have the oral fluid detection window there. Now, your analysis, it has to metabolize. It has to get into, as we said, that fat system. And then you may not, if someone used marijuana in the morning before work, and they come in high, right into the workday, and you do your analysis, you may not detect that use. I've seen that a lot with school testing for students. They see students that come in the morning and they go, we have to do drug tests on these kids immediately, and none of the kids fail their test. They're negative. Well, what's going on there? we didn't have a quick detection window with urinalysis. It's oral fluid that would capture that. And then hair, of course, the hair has to grow out from the root and has to get into the protein of the hair. So it definitely, now you can get longer, excuse me, windows of use there. So I'm going to take a sip of water, so I apologize. You know, a longer length of time that marijuana has been in the system with hair, not with getting that right away use, and so that's a good thing. Here you can see the positivity rates for urine versus oral fluid, and of course you're seeing such windows with the THC alone. You see a percentage increase, but you do see a that amount of positivity rates with your oral fluid testing, and all that. Not anything that he wants to add to that, but where we are in fluids is that that D has been approved for oral fluid specimens on the Federal Register, but the mandatory guidelines now need to be altered to include oral fluid testing. So you can't pull the trigger on it yet. It's not quite there. It is coming, but we are waiting for all of the 49 Part 40 to be amended to include oral fluid. So those standards are being established right now at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration level, and we'll get those confirmatory numbers and all of the medical review officer standards and the training requirements and all of that. And we're looking forward to oral fluid being accepted as a DOT test here in the near future. So this is just an update of some of the discussions that are going on in the timeline that's happening. Their public comments happened this last summer, and so now we're seeing the reviews completed in October, and then there's time for all of this to go up on the Federal Register. So we're hoping that by April of 2016, we'll see that publication come out, and we'll know when the implementation period will be. So that'll be very exciting. That we'll see the next 12 to 4 months after April that we could open up for oral fluid testing. So, of course, the product that most people are really liking is that Intercept product, and it is a fantastic, very easy to use product, and I just really appreciate the sponsorship of Intercept for this webinar, and I would like to now take an opportunity to open up to any questions that you may have. And so I'm happy to hear if any of those have come through, and we've got a few minutes to get to those before we end.
Audience today, I've known Jo, I've heard her present before. I don't know that there's anybody who knows more about this issue than she does. And so the way that she's able to relate what's going on in Colorado with the rest of the country is very, relative, obviously, to what's going on. I think here's one question, Jo. This is from me, actually. We know that legislation in Ohio was voted on by Ohio voters, but they voted against legalization. There was controversy there regarding the monopoly issue that some companies had supported that would have given them sort of a corner on the market. But the question is, do you see more states, with next year being a presidential election year, do you see more states looking at legalization legislation, and what can employers do between now and then to try to become active on the issue?
The marijuana industry is very organized, and they have key targeted states. You can see their strategy. It's publicly posted on marijuanapolicyproject.org. That's M as in marijuana, PP, policyproject.org. I'm going to send you to the website so that you can look on the map, find your state, and see what the strategy is, who are supporting the bills that are going forward, or the props that are. It's good to get educated about what's going on, and as employers, I would get with your Chamber of Commerce in your state, to take a stand against this, and get involved with whatever efforts there are to speak out and educate people about negative impacts. So as employers, we have an extremely strong voice to make a difference with voters and to help them understand the impact to our economy. One of the most important things that I could have given you today were those cost outcomes, because voters here, Colorado's not making money, it's costing them money. They'll think twice. And so you have to look at each state, what's trending with those voters, but Ohio was a huge message that people are not going to continue to be duped by people who are in this to make their own profit in their back pocket that won't benefit all of us. And that it's just simply the way that it is. It was a very clear message, and it was very interesting how that was unveiled. But thank you, Bill. I think that Smart Approaches to Marijuana nationally is an organization that has state affiliates. You can find out who is counterbalancing those arguments in your state and get involved.
Great. And I notice that we're out of time, Joe. Let me just say to our audience that we will, through the current consulting group, we will get answers to all of your questions and email those answers out to everybody who was on today's call. But we know that everybody, carefully schedules their time, and you've got to get back to other things that are on your schedule today. So with that, Joe, I want to thank you again for a wonderful presentation, and assure our audience that they'll have an opportunity to get to the recordings. In fact, Jessica's going to come back on right now and tell the audience how they can link up to the recording of today's presentation. With that, I'll turn the virtual microphone back over to Jessica.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joe, for all of that information. On behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. If you asked a question today that was not answered, a representative will answer your question via email. Any other questions that you have relating to today's topic, you may submit them using info@currentconsultinggroup.com, and we'll make sure that they get to the right eyes and get answered. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.